I will do is point out some of the techniques that were used in the early days when we didn't have anybody, right? You know, when we were limited in our populace. I think some of you remember that situation, um, but we are reaching a point right now that when we come back, we will be in a similar situation. And I mean that is that before we had a full slate of people in different activities. You know, there were fighters, there were rapier people, there were heavy weapons, there were archers, there were fiber arts, you know, there were static and performing arts. But now we'll have like one or two people in some fields and maybe no one in the other field. So we're all going to have to take up the slack. Why I can teach this class? Well, the first reason why is that when I came to Ansteorra in AS8, there were three people in the steps that were talking to each other, and there were nine people in Houston, Stargate, and they hadn't grown in 2 years. Now, they would be growing because they would get the Ren Fair, but at that particular moment, they weren't growing. And from that point to about a year later, steps grew big enough to actually be a barony, and groups like Norman started, you know, Namron, and they were all influenced by the people in the steps. And what we call the I-35 um, alliance uh, grew from the steps. Now, just so you get a little background, when I joined in AS3, first place I didn't know it was AS3 because I lived in Birmingham, Alabama. And the gentleman that started our group had just come back from Baycon. You know, I haven't ever figured out if it was a World Con or not, or just a pre-World Con. But that particular event had one of the greatest impacts upon the SCA because of that particular event and the activity and the people in the Berkeley area. SCA went poof and grew. 3 4 Kingdoms came out of it, and you know the numbers increased radically every day. Now, one of the difference between today and then was the way we thought of the SCA. The description by one of the founders at that time in a handbook was that we were a loosely organized group of individuals who loved the Middle Ages, who loved history. And from that, they had a lot of excitement in what they were doing. They weren't specialized, they were eclectic, and they had very many things, but they made some really good recruitment tools. And while I didn't know I was reading from their things, their handbook was one of the first things that I ever got. Now you can go to the West and go to AS3. There are stories about AS3. And if you go scroll down to the bottom, you'll find the flyers and the first um, newcomer's handbook, basically. It's interesting to look at. And you might want to look at some of the pictures. I would have put it on here, but I couldn't figure out how to do it because I'm not tech savvy. But one of the things they did back in those days is, and needed in the beginning of Ansteorra, was that we recognized that we needed people and we needed people fast. And what we did was America sometimes, got hired to do that as an actor. And we'd go out and we'd flirt with people, and he'd invite the girls and I'd invite the guys. And they all thought they were meeting up with us, but we just put them together and ran off. But the point was, my father, who was part of Kadal then, when we had a big event of some time, would just stop and invite people. He invited a lady who was just walking down the street. And 3 years later, she considered herself part of my household. And I wondered how she'd gotten in. And he says, well, your father invited me, stuffed me in a costume, and brought me to the second 12th night. So, I mean, we were extremely excited about what we were doing, and we just invited everybody. We didn't worry about the concept of, oh, I don't know, how do they say it? Quality recruits. We invited everybody and then dressed them up and fixed them, kind of thing. And that's one of the things that the SCA in the early days really was built around, which is there were a lot of people that did game playing, and there were a lot of people at that time beginning to do a lot of computers. But the joy of the SCA was the fact that you could actually interact with people, right? You could learn from people. You could interact with people. And most of the people that were joining at that time, and I suspect that there's still a lot of them, were introverts. They were loners. And so this was a chance for them to participate in a community. And a lot of them used their persona to hide their personality faults behind the persona. But we were very eclectic. We had newsletters that worked very well, and we took those from the people in the West. They had articles in them and lots of photographs of people doing things, people in our group looking happy and enthused. And of course, as an organizer, one of the things is that people look at groups like, is there a place for me? Will I find friends? Now, we can't, one of the mistakes people did early on was they got involved with the dream, right? And went away from the stress on the history, but went to the dream, and they went to the concept that we're all family. Well, the reason why that's a mistake is number one, when you say dream, what does that mean? It's better, you do better recruitment when you say, we do this, right? We build, and of course, the pomp and circumstance was part of what was coming out of the West. The West recruited on, we're building together this world of the Middle Ages. And of course, they even talked about the fact that the social unit that we are around is the king, or in our case, the baron and baroness, and their court. And their court is actually everybody that's there. It's not like a court. Anyway, a court in the Middle Ages were people that were there in attendance. And so the premise was, you come, you participate, you wear the costumes, and you invite other people to come. And that was one of the reasons why we were recruiting so quickly, was because we showed them by our newsletter and by what we said that there were lots of activities to do. They could come, and if they had something they wanted to see, we try to work it out. Now, I was the ANS officer at the time, and sometimes that became a little difficult for me because sometimes we didn't have somebody to match up. It's like I took beginning belly dancing 5 times because the ladies came in and they wanted to do belly dancing, and so we get doing it, and then they would either get too good and run off with the gypsies hoe, or they decide they really would rather do lace making because somebody would show up. And then I'd wait around and somebody else would want to do belly dancing. Finally, I got enough people together that they could do belly dancing without me. And that was the same thing with the siege machine people. I had one solitary siege machine person. And so I would get together with him and we'd build siege machines until I found another person who was interested in siege machines, and I put them together, and I didn't have to build siege machines, though I've always maintained a certain interest after that. But part of it was we made places, everybody was doing it. It wasn't like, oh, that's the hospitaler, and you go do what the hospitaler said. But we did not promise them a family. And the reason why you don't want to do that is simply because often you can't deliver. I mean, maybe they'll find somebody that they have that kind of relationship with, but there's a chance they won't. Everybody isn't your friend. Just like if you're in a bridge club, everybody isn't your friend, but you play bridge with all of them. So the stress was on doing, you know, we're all going to get together and make clothes, or we're all going to paint banners, you know, and we had lots of different activities on the books. Some of them were a lot of them were a little scarce. They were skimpy people, not that many people were interested in it, but they came anyway. And sort of with smoke and mirrors, we appeared larger, and that attracted more people. And when we brought them in, then we got other people. And then shortly, within like a year, we had uh, we had bukus of we went from 4 or 5 in my family, which made 8, 10 people of the steps, to 60 within a year, and made it to being a barony. Of course, it was easier back in those days, but we became a barony within a year and a quarter. So, and if you look at what uh,
Your Grace, you've lost your audio.
still long enough to be invited, and they brought them in the idea of we're having fun doing things. Um, but as I said, I've seen so many groups have little splinters because they were promised that they would be family and friends with everybody in the group, and then it didn't turn out that way. And that's one of the important things. In the early days, they literally put it in the flyers that costumes were mandatory. They also said it was discourteous to belittle someone in a costume if they've made the attempt. And they stressed the whole idea of courtesy. We're going to be courteous because that's part of an evil atmosphere. And they, and of course, if you, that's part of the thing of having your social unit around a ruling noble. I mean, I think some famous first, people that were there in the beginning said the first thing you have is a king, and then he has a queen, and then all the officers, and all the officers, ladies or gentlemen, and voila, you now have a court, and then you have other people, and they gave jobs out to other people, titles. And so before they knew it, they ended up with 10 people and 20 people and then 40 people, and it was geometrically going up. Um,
Your Grace, may I pause you for a moment?
yes, certainly.
We're getting more people in the room. And to help with bandwidth, could you speak just a little bit more slowly? And that will help you to be clear for everyone who's joining.
I'm sorry.
That's
I guess
okay.
I'm nervous. I've never done this before.
No problem, and we appreciate you being here. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, if you folks that have been here give me a moment, I'm going to read in. My cat just hit the Zoom button and did something weird. Um, they've been trying to help me all day. As I said, I would suggest that you go back to the history project of the West, and when you go back there, you can look at the original handbook, which is interesting, and you can look at the pictures, and you can the other thing you might want to do is to go to the Ansteorra site and look at they have one of the trumpeters, and different groups have different problems. It's like Beaumont has always been a low population group, and I don't know if it's because they're all based around colleges or something, but they're constantly losing people, so they have to constantly recruit people. And one of the things they do is they've always had a very good um, newsletter. But what makes it good is because the newsletter has um, news about events that work. That technique worked. If your newsletter has a little blurb about, which make it sound like all these people had a wonderful time at this event they went to. If you have pictures of the people looking happy and doing things, first place, it gives them facial recognition, but that's really not that important. What gives them the idea that people come into the group and have fun, right? And it also, the both of those stress participation. That, I think at one time one of our kings ran around with buttons that said the SCA is not a spectator sport, right? We actually interact with people. But then there would be little help things in the newsletter about how you interacted, like how to give out a favor, or what is a favor, and what is largesse, and the suggestion that everyone should give out largesse if they can. I mean, even if you only have one piece. And I know some of you give out largesse all the time. I've seen you. Um, but of course, I got very poor, and it became hard for me to have things. But now I don't have much, but to sit here, I can gather up some. So what we did is we stressed that if a newcomer came by or somebody you had never seen before, it was important to talk to them. We also stressed that if you're with your friends in a small circle, you should try to open up and let these people in, even though it's your natural tendency not to, because we really want to talk to our friends. We don't want to go through the whole song and dance to the new person. But if we don't talk to the new person, they don't stay, right? And that's one of the things that I think the fact that I found a lot of people would literally say, they'd come up and they say, well, what should I wear? And they go, oh, talk to Lucy May. She's the hospitaler. Well, that's not, they were asking people, and that was an icebreaker, That was another thing that we did originally that worked a lot. We got that from Bo Trimble, which was one of the original people in the SCA. She suggested and had a whole list of matchmaking. It's sort of like, you want to go around and introduce everybody as much as possible, but there were also activities that you could rope people into, and then they would interact with each other, right? That can be as simple as a game of blind man's bluff. I know it was a very popular game in the Middle Ages, but you can see from the pictures, they did dancing, they did archery, they had belly dancers, maybe only one, but they had belly dancers, they had entertainment at the feast. And that was something that turned out to be more important. And you can see that in Trimaris when they usually have entertainment at the feast. So newcomers, when they come in and don't know anybody, I mean, the argument was that we want to talk to our friends. But the truth is, they don't have any friends. Or if they're like me, their friends all decided to drop dead. I'm a little pissed off at them for that, but they did do that. So I do not necessarily have someone to sit and talk to. So it's nice if you have something going on. But they did things like provide hobby horses and have hobby horse parades and, silly things. But they were entertaining to a degree. I mean, one of the things that Elsie did in the beginning was that they would have a parade at the front of, which happened at tournaments, at their Elsie Defender. And the Elsie Defender, this parade would have fantastic animals in it, things like that. And to be honest, they were pretty infantile, right? I was going to use a bad word, but they really were pretty tacky. But given a month later, everybody was talking like they were, Lucas's special effects. I mean, we did the Green Knight thing, and I took a hole in a table and put a platter on it, and we took the top off the platter, and there was a speaking head, like in the Green Knight. And it was simply a man who stuck his head through a hole. But later on, they informed me that it was a hologram. I'm going, a hologram? My techno is not anywhere near as good as a hologram. And it's like, they told me we had a horse brought in by two large men, over the heads of ladies with blue veils, and they said that it was strung on wheels, and not wheels but on wires, and came out of the sky flying. And I'm going, no, but if you remember it that way, then that's a really good memory, and if it's your first vent, you're a little gullible, kind of thing. But the idea was you wanted something that attracted their attention and at least gave them something to talk to the person next to them about, So getting people to interact with each other and giving them things to interact over broke the ice, and they were able to make friends. I've seen more friends made by working on a project like my horse than, all the, conversations that people have. And also, a lot of our people, or the people that were actually the beginning core, were historians, and they liked to talk about history. And they were often somewhat boring. But when they found somebody else to talk about history, they would go at it and they'd have a wonderful time. And they would be excited, and they would make other people excited. And some of them actually, for a while there, did interesting things like have that trivia game on history, and of course, we also, if you can see the early Western pictures of what they talk about, and their list of events are pretty interesting. They had Quest 2 and Quest in the right after we got big enough to not know what we wanted to do with ourselves, we started having quests because we picked it up from Aitenveld, who picked it up from the West. And so we would have quests, and people would run off and play in the quests, and or be in the quest. And this would give people a safe place to interact on. That was a successful uh, thing. Now, since I promised you the things we did that didn't work, one of the earliest idea was we had to have more events. Chorus of Natterhelm decided that instead of having the once every 2.5 months little event that we had, and I forgot to talk about little events. We had, because we didn't have a lot of activities in the kingdom, we weren't a kingdom, we were a region. Um, there was a lot of time in between the big events. So we took to having little events. We had them in people's houses. We'd go over there and move all their furniture into the uh, uh, bedroom and set up. We didn't have wall paintings at that time. We just had fabric. So we put fabric on the wall and candles and the medieval look, which is a bare room with 2 or 3 chairs in it, and the light would be pretty, and we'd play music in the background. Where you couldn't see them, like put a screen in front of it and claim there were musicians behind it. We did a lot of that, but the the thing about it was it had atmosphere. People were in their clothes and they would practice feeling comfortable. So when they went to the big events, they were prepared to interact. We scaffold them. If any of you are in education, you know what I'm talking about. We gave them a scaffold that allowed them to actually participate in bigger events. You know, it's just a thought. Northkeep used to have an active fighter practice that did that, if I'm not mistaken. I wasn't actually here, so I don't know. But we found it important to have something besides fighter practice and business meetings. We needed something that actually had the show and the magic with it. And that worked. But when they wanted us to do, because it was working, the powers that be in the steps decided that us peons should do this more often. And, that was the first thing we forgot is a lot of people say, well, things just happen. No, things do not just happen. People make them happen. They get off of their butts and they organize something. If it's just a snowing guild, or if it's just, a, a, a brewer's guild, and you can have a guild with one person in it, actually, but it's better if you have at least two. But they would get, somebody had to make these events, they actually were good training for doing big events. But the truth was, it was a lot of work if you wanted to make it with atmosphere and pretty and beauty and all that. So when they said, no, no, we have one every month, and I've seen that particular solution being touted at a lot of places. And the truth is, it has failed in every single situation. Even if you're gigantic, one every something every month is a good idea, but an event every month is not.
Willow, your audio is fading.
because everybody had a different interpretation. So we limited that to being more to something you could actually put a handle on. Okay.
Your Grace?
Well, I
Your
I
Grace,
don't
can I
know if that
interrupt you for a
helped.
moment?
What?
Can I interrupt you for a moment? We're getting a
Yes.
message that your network bandwidth is low. So if you could try and speak a little bit more slowly. When you speak faster, we lose audio quality.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry again to
That's
everyone.
okay. This is new and this is your first time doing this, and we really appreciate you going so far out of your comfort zone to speak with us. Thank you.
And okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to be turned off because I lost my power. Now, if you have an idea for something that excited you when you first came in, think about that. Would you, I'd like us to talk now a little bit about and brainstorm on good ideas, right? Um, do you think since we're on, is there any way, I don't know if uh, I know the only way the Chronicle can have more and diverse things in the the newsletters is that somebody has to write things, right? And so that's sort of like we should all see if we can encourage each other to write things, how to's, you know, uh, and the same thing is about events. Events you go to, they can't put in a review of the event or what happened at the event or your adventures going to the event unless you write it down and give it to them. And the first stage is to try to talk somebody else into doing one. Now, that usually means you'll be forced to do one too. But, you know, if we talk everybody we can into participating, then it's easier. Then we can play the Tom Sawyer and talk to everybody about how fun it is to paint the fence, you know. Um, and of course, then we have to, when we do that, that was one thing we talked about among ourselves, which we learned again from the West, was to compliment people when they did something. That's why originally we all were giving largesse to each other. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking, and this was one of our successful things about the good people did. You know, if you had a good baron, you made a point of publicly saying something, that other people could hear. That was another thing we took into account. A lot of people poo poo gossip, but gossip actually has a vital part in a community because when people gossip, young people, or in our case, newcomers, listen and they learn about the things they're not supposed to do. Well, because that was sort of against our concept of how Ansteorrans should behave, we decided that we would say things in public about how good somebody did something, you know, how nice that dress is, or isn't that a great, didn't they make a great effort to make the pretty campsite? Or just in general, when somebody got out of their comfort zone, just like Zabeda just did and complimented me. And she made me remember that and complimented me on getting out of my comfort zone. That's something we need to encourage people to do. And this is one of those things that a role model is the fastest way of teaching. And a lot of people learn a lot from listening to other people and see what they're doing. Now, some of our younger members have actually, in the school system, have been discouraged from standing up and doing things without some hint of how to do it. So I don't know if you remembered, but back in my youth, my mother, my father, my grandparents, when they did anything, they sort of ran a ongoing commentary on why they did it. You know, we'd be walking down someplace and they would see something and they would talk to me about it, you know, about how elegant that person could speak in public or what they did nice for other people. Well, I think that running commentary, which was something we used to do in the early days, you know, sort of fill people in. Well, somewhere down the line, we had so many people doing so much, we didn't seem to need that anymore. But now we're going to have people with absolutely no, when we recruit a young person or a younger member, they will not know what we're talking about. I mean, I came from the South, so there's a small, and my family owned property. So there's a small jump from the manor house and the medieval thing of the deep South, which, you know, stressed, you know, the knightly virtues and etc., even though they were horrible racists. But they still, you know, stress that in their everyday conversation. Well, there's little difference between being a Southern belle and being a medieval lady. You know, it's about the same thing. But our younger people have not seen people functioning in a community in that way. I don't think. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen it, so I don't know. Maybe you would have some insight on that. Anybody want to talk? Anyway, then I'll just natter on. Um,
We
but
do have people who are muted so that their background noise doesn't interrupt you.
okay,
So why don't we go ahead and pause? And folks, if you would like to unmute or raise your hand, or you have a question that you'd like to put in the chat, we can give folks a moment for that. And if there aren't any questions, then of course we can continue, Your Grace.
all right.
Anyone?
No.
I would say that uh, uh, you know, the community sense that students have, or well, you know, I'm in Moonshadow, so of course a lot of college students, but it is true, they need a little bit more nurturing to fall into those relationships, right? Um, they need a little bit more welcome, I feel like, than maybe 20 years ago. Of course,
Well,
we look different. When I go work at demo, I am not good bait anymore, right? So that's part of it. You know, when I approach them, I'm an old person now, so I have to be a little extra friendly towards the youngsters.
yeah, because we're scary. Yeah, we're old people. You know, we may judge them, right? Um, that is the input behind the concept that we're not going to say anything negative on our newsletters or, you know, on our, you know, Facebook or anything. But that's a little one sided because not saying anything negative is good, but we need to say, we need to point out the good things, what they should be doing. And it's like knowing the titles. A lot of people are, we used to spend a lot of time practicing titles. I mean, me and Lloyd Von Aker and Alamandus and Torgatai, that was with my first husband. John isn't around now, all right, what I'm talking about. We actually would stand up in front of people and say, "Good morning, my lord," you know, "Good morning, my lady. How are you doing today? What a pleasant day it is." And we would show them by our interactions with other people, and especially people that had hats on at the time, I didn't have a hat at the time, how you interact with these people. And it's not a hard thing, but it's easier to show them than it is actually to take a, because they're not going to go to the classes. Because 90% of the people are so tired of classes, they don't show up. I mean, that just doesn't seem fun to them. But by doing it, and all of us should, since I feel embarrassed, you folks have such lovely costumes on, and I'm in my sick bed, and I'm lucky I have anything on. But we need to show them that it's not scary, that they can actually do it without looking like a fool, you know. It, and in that case, I think a few funny stories, like the man who didn't know how to handle his rapier and broke the pane glass door because he bowed to a lady and his sword stuck through the door. You know, there are actually ways that there's actually what they call the baby books that actually tell you how to handle your rapier when you're in public and have to bow. But we used to teach a funny little class where we get up and bow at each other, right? No, 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 you cannot bow that way because your butt sticks out. You know, well, of course you can bow that way. But your ego sticks out. You know, that's the kind of thing. Um, that's the kind of thing that helped us acclimatate, or I'm a sociologist, so the word I would use was socialize individuals into the SCA. And that would make them successful. And it's like getting people to know a little bit about, like if they say, well, I'm going to be Norse, right? I had a young gentleman who's now an old knight, but when I first met him, he was young, and I made him his first tunic. And when I did, I talked about the different sleeve lengths of the Celtic people and the Norse people. And he became an absolute, and then he went and studied, and then he became an absolute pill when it came down to making him costumes because they had to be historically correct, which is not that hard with a Norse tunic. It can be unless you're going to weave it yourself, which you didn't get that bad. But we need to, when we interact with people, every once in a while we need to turn the light bulb on and say, oh, yes, I will show them something, you know.
Your
And
Grace,
yes,
this is your 5-minute warning. The class time period is going to be ending in just a few minutes. We did have one
oh,
question from the audience. Julie would like to know, I would love to hear how people come up with their persona and any advice you might have for someone who's wanting to build their first persona.
all right. Most people's persona starts off being related to being the court and the medieval atmosphere of our groups. You know, you live in Northkeep, you have a baron. You live in Ansteorra, you have a king. You're starting a principality, you will have a prince. You start off with that. And it's okay. It's like being a lord, or especially a lady in any time period, has certain inherent things that go along. And we all start off of good lineage. Now, as you do that, the first thing you're going to decide on is your costume. And, if you want to be an Elizabethan, or if you want to be an Elizabethan, you know, um, count, well, first you're going to have to get an Elizabethan outfit. But until you get an Elizabethan outfit, you can get a name that isn't, is basically generic, and you can wear generic SCA clothes. But you should start working toward having your costuming look like who you are. Now, some people, it just sounds funny if you're standing there with a fuzzy hat and a Norse outfit on, and you say I'm from 1500 Italy. Well, you don't look like you're from 50. So starting off with maybe a persona that gives you an excuse for not knowing things, like you came from the backwoods of Norway, you know, or you're actually your family is like sort of similar to uh, oh, I can't remember his name, the hero in the Three Musketeers, D'Artagnan. I think he came from the Basque country. Well, Basques are like forever, just like Scots are forever in the backwoods. So if you come, you're leaving someplace where you've been in a convent for most of your life, or something, and you're leaving that, and now you're coming into a court situation, and of course you won't know things. So you can play that up like Ivar Battleskull, when he went to his first tournament, says, what do you mean I can't kill the horses? You know, and they had to explain to him at Lion's Tourney that if he killed the horses, then the archers up there would shoot him. And he said, well, that's just not right, kind of thing. And he wandered around complaining that he couldn't kill the horses because that's the first thing he thought of. Yes, ma'am?
Your Grace, I was going to ask. I believe you had a secondary persona named Kate. Was it? That
Oh,
went short.
yes.
And when would you talk about your servants as you were putting up your tents?
Yeah, Mary Catherine Anna Louise Sullivan Cadall, and she married a Barnett. So now she's Cadall Barnett, right? And she came from the backwoods of Ireland, you know.
You
Uh,
should you should tell the people who have never heard of them why you made a second persona for yourself.
I made a second persona because we have three time periods in the SCA, and my first persona could handle the chivalric and the early period just fine. But when I tried to move into the Renaissance, she went crazy. It was like, no, I don't do Renaissance. It's a stupid theory. So I created a persona that allowed me to have the values of the Renaissance culture, which is different, radically different. The changes were radical. So by taking Mary Catherine out, I could interact with Renaissance people and be feel like I fitted, kind of thing. But I will tell you, when you create a secondary persona, it should be clearly defined by your clothing. And um, because people always get confused, I was queen of Ansteorra the first time, and I went down to the Ren Fair outside of Houston, and I was in Mary Catherine's persona, dancing the jig and having a great time. And this guy came up to me and he said, well, where are you from, my lady? And I said, I'm from Namron, Oklahoma. And he went, oh, that's where the evil queen lives. And I felt so bad. I was just feeling horrid because he was saying all these horrible things about me. And I went and I found a third party and asked them to explain to him that, because I didn't want him to think I, entrapped him or something. But it was one of those things. And years later, he would go, if Mary Catherine shows up, he runs over and embraces her and kisses her on her cheek. But if I show up, he goes, "Huh," and walks off because he still doesn't like Willow. He just likes Mary Catherine. But getting a persona, I generally discussed it. I did not actually go into detail because it's about it. It's another hour, and I'm not signed up to teach you persona. But if anyone wants, and tell people that I'm going to try, if I can get a ride, I'm going to try to show up when we finally get out into the world. And if you, or you could call me and I'd be more than willing to talk to you on the phone, or maybe one of these in-person live things on Zoom or something. I don't know, but I'd be more than willing to go to help you with a series of questions and answers that I've found very useful over the years, like uh, what time period, what do you know about it, and then I could tell you books that you could use and help you with a name. And there are resources out there that are very helpful. But one of the things that make it easier to get a persona is to fit it into a community of people. So if you can find somebody else who's working on the same persona, area that you are, or even somebody that isn't your area, and you could play off of each other, that works very much. It's a lot of fun too, you know.
And
Um,
on that excellent suggestion, we have reached the end of our time period for the class. Your Grace Willow, thank you so much for coming by to be one of our instructors tonight.
did I mess up the audio too much?
No, it was fine. We had a couple moments where there was rubber banding, but there was nothing you could have done about that. So thank you very much. We sure appreciate your time. And we will go ahead and get set up for the next class in this classroom, which is woven insignia. And I believe that our instructor is already here.